Welcome back to the channel of Truth, Trust and Transparency. Today, I'm looking into a question that was sent to me on Instagram DMs. Another one from probably the youngest submission we've had, 21 years old. He's just managed to buy his first investment property. So congratulations. Hopefully I'm going to answer this question. It's going to provide some value to not only the guy that's sent it to me, but also you guys out there. If you are getting value, hit subscribe. Don't have to keep saying it. 2,500 followers by the end of this year. I'm almost at 1,000. So 40% of that's about 40% of the way there, but plenty of more work to go. So I'll read out the particular question and I'll sort of break it down into a couple of things to think about as usual, not financial advice, but if you ask me a question, I'm going to respond and give you my thoughts and opinions. Seek legal and financial advice, of course, but maybe this video will give you a few more things to think about. So the question reads, "Hey Davey, would love to hear your thoughts. 21 years old with 80K left and a house recently purchased for $760,000 in Victoria. The property, insert address, sits on 777 square meters of land. A few town planners believe I could add 2 additional dwellings. A builder has estimated $450 to $500 for the build. To avoid a CHMP and the public space contribution fee, 10% of the project value, I would likely need to sell them on one title, 2 dwellings plus the existing house on a separate title. I understand this would impact the valuation due to the limited comparable sales data for 2 dwellings on a single title. Post-construction rental income would be around $1,500 per week against a $1.2 million mortgage, which would put me close to neutral holding costs. I originally got the idea from a neighbouring property, 3/9 Cherry Plum Court, Cranbourne North. That's where the property is located. We'll dig into that as well. That completed a similar project. My question is, should I focus on maximising this site, or would it make more sense to purchase another $600,000 to $700,000 resi property in a year or so, build equity, and then sell one to fund a small duplex project eventually? Also, keep smashing out the Everything Property podcast. I've been loving the episodes and the guests you've had on this year. Don't mind if you want to make a video on this case study, but please don't display the address. I will respect the concern regarding the address, although most people do send it for me, do allow me to share it. And I want to break this down into a couple of things. The first is going to be my question for you, Lewis, that has asked this question is, are you a property developer or are you a property investor? Because you need to make your mind up or choose, one way or one approach or the other. The reason you might be feeling stuck is that you might be trying to cross-pollinate and blend those sorts of ideas. If you're a developer, there's obviously one thing to do with the site. If you're a property investor, it's a totally, completely different other thing to do for the site. So that would depend on what you're going to do, who you want to be, property investor, and build out from there, or a property developer and go on to do those sorts of things. When I always say, and if you do choose the development route, is you need to build up some sort of base. The base comes in handy when you need to be drawing out, for example, equity for a project or to buy a new site, unless you are on a very high paying job. You've done well at 21, but I doubt it's, the sort of $500,000. If I said, your next site's going to be $300,000-$400,000, it's very hard for people to save up that sort of money. It's easier for you to do an equity release to be able to go, oh, cool, equity release, boom, then I go again. So what you need to think about is how will you build up that base and how will you build up sort of that equity base that you can then pull from? Or if we're developing, how do we go about this? My question would be, what is the strategy in which you bought this property? Was it to buy, and it sounds like you're buying it for an investment, and then you noticed the other development and said, I could change tact here. That could be an issue because if you've bought that, for example, in your personal name, you may have ramifications if you want to develop that property. So if you've bought it in your personal name, which if it's your first investment at 21, you probably have, and you want to now develop it, you're going to run into an issue of capital gains tax pretty hard and pretty fast. However, there could be a little bit of a way around that if you bear with me, and I'll go into it. The first thing I want to dig into and with this is, you've said the builder has quoted 450, 500K. Now, for single story dwellings, they look to be about sort of 80 square meters each, 160 square meters total, at 450,000 divided by 160. We're looking at, I think for this particular development, I would say construction costs are probably low 2,000s per square meter. So keep that in mind. You're almost building an oversized granny flat. So building two of those with maybe a little bit of site works and a bit of sloping and stuff like that, that's probably bang on. My first suggestion is going to be, so you need to decide if you're a property investor or developer. The second is going to be, how are you going to build up your base? The third is going to be, what is the strategy with this particular property? The next is going to be, you need to get a little bit more dialed in on what your numbers are going to be, because it is not just a build price that you are going to be dealing with. And I don't know what the deposit was for the $760,000 house that you bought, but you need to dial in. So the costs that you are going to have are around the project costs. So a town planner and or architect with experience is going to tell you what consultants you need, what they're going to charge for your planning permit, and for you to also submit that for council. You will then have council contributions. Now, you've said in there that 10% of the public space contribution is 10% of the project value. I highly, highly, highly doubt that a council, they charge an enormous amount, but they're charging 10% of a project value. Because I look at that and go, if I do $1 million townhouse development of 3 two-story townhouses, they charge 10% of the project value. That would be $100,000 in contributions. That would make it very unfeasible for a lot of people to try to even do anything remotely development-like. So I think you need to hone in on and start a spreadsheet and get really particular on your numbers. So you're going to have that. You're going to have then your construction costs around the builder. Is the builder including their home warranty insurance? Is the builder including site costs, landscaping, all those sorts of things, as well as that? You need to put them into your construction costs. You then have holding costs. Can you be able to rent this property out whilst they're doing work down the back of your property that you've purchased? You will be able to tell me that. You should be able to tell me that, right? You've also got like those sorts of contributions. I guarantee it's not 10% of project value, but you have those sorts of contributions. So you need to sort of break out, and then you have selling costs, GST, then you have agent fees, all those sorts of things that you need to plug in and get a sort of feasibility together to see if it actually makes sense to develop these things out, because it's not just $450,000 to $500,000 build. There's a lot of other costs that I see tons of people get caught up in and miss. And then, they're too deep into it to figure out that it hasn't made money. They've got to finish it. You've done a project for 12 or 18 months. You haven't made any money on it. What I will do as well for this particular deal, I'll break into the deal and a little bit around it too, but what you haven't probably thought about, or there's a few ways that you can go here. Okay, let's play them out. You can always, you've secured the site. Now, if you've secured that in your personal name, one option would be you can develop it, sell it, then go again. Again, to do that, you would have to get the feasibility and be able to tell me or tell yourself what it's actually going to cost to go through that and see what the ramifications or what the costs are. That is one option. The next option is going to be if you develop it and hold it. You've said that there's going to be a $1.2 million mortgage on it. But what you haven't said is that there's going to likely be, if you've bought the initial house for $760,000, let's discount that to say $650,000. I've got one of the comps here saying that those finished townhouses will be about $550,000, $575,000 each. I'm going to say, but by the time you finish it, let's just say the $575,000 each. I add that together, and that gives me a total of $1.8 million in completed project value. Now, if I calculate what 80% of that is to see if there's any equity, the bank will let me borrow up to $1.44 million. I minus from that my $1.2 million of debt. And by doing this development, I will then have $240,000 of usable equity, which is huge, So that could then, if you did that project, held on to them, pulled out the equity, you can use that to go again in a time frame. And this is the beauty of development, in a time frame that is quicker than if you were to go out and buy, say, another $600,000 house. You said you've got 80 grand. Let's just say you use that, you bought another $600,000 house. If that grew 10%, you have enough there for, say, a 10% deposit. That's great. But then that property would need to jump up to 750, 800 before you had a LVR lower than 80% for you to draw out equity. Whereas if you developed this property yourself, the one that you just bought, you're manufacturing equity really quick. You have a few options then, because if you bought and held it, what would also be great about that too is, and if you bought it in your personal name, you've stuffed up, but the way you'd mitigate paying as much tax as possible, you want to minimize your tax payment, is you could potentially have 3 and you could get them refinanced, or you could sell 1 down, right? Keep 2. Then a few years' time, you could sell another down, then keep 1, and then a few years' time, sell another one. So you're breaking up that profit over different tax years to potentially spread that out. Now, you need to speak to an accountant around how that would be. If you want a property savvy one, reach out and I can let you know. But that's also another option. Another option is you can just hold it, because if you've got an asset that is neutrally geared, that's going to be better than any other I would say investment that you have at the moment. Remember, you've then got $1.8 million of property in the market. Do the development, capitalize it into a home loan after, capitalize the construction into a home loan after. You've got $1.2 million $1.2 million of debt, 400 across each asset. You can then split it up and do it that way. You can hold them all in one line. You don't even have to subdivide it. You could just build this, have them rented out all in one line, and then hold and retain that. And then down the line, should you want to, because here's another thing that people don't realize, is if you subdivide it, you've got 3 lots of council rates, water, electricity, all those sorts of things. So you need to think about if you want to subdivide it now or keep it in one line and then hold back on the subdivision unless you want to sell it. If you're going to keep it, you might not need to subdivide it potentially. So that's an option. The other option, let's just say you kept to that, you used your $80,000 and then you went and bought something at, say, $600,000. Now, if I just do some quick numbers, your $600,000, let's just say you used a 12% deposit, $72,000. Now, on some quick numbers, that house, if you went out and bought this is just purely based on numbers. If you went out and bought a $600,000 house and you spent your money and you put a 12% deposit on it, your mortgage is then going to be about $528,000. That $600,000 house would have to increase to $750,000 for you to then, if we work on an 80% LVR, then we take away your loan for you to have another $80,000, in equity, in usable equity for you to use. So my question for you to think about, Lewis, is can you find a suburb that is going to do 25% in growth in a short time frame? Because then think of it this way. You find a suburb, 25% growth. Find a suburb that you would need to find a suburb that's going to do 25% growth for that $600,000 property to increase to 750. 750, we times it by 0.8 to get what our LVR needs to be, and then we minus the loan, and then you'd have $80,000. Can you find that property that's going to do 25% of growth quicker than what it will take you to be able to get the DA on this, or the planning permit, whatever it's called in Victoria, for you to then build those properties out and retain? And then You look at the end result. If you've maintained the 761 that you've got and the 600 you've got $1.36 million worth of property, albeit potentially that second asset you can relocate somewhere, so you would be a little bit more diversified. Option one, so you have a couple of options. Option one, if you're buying another investment, you can potentially diversify in location. However, if you buy that and you're tapped out in your borrowing capacity, you'd have a property worth 600 and a property worth 760, which means you'd have $1.36 million worth of property, right? Or if you developed what you had, you'd have potentially $1.8 million worth of property. You would need to then do some research on that Cranbourne area to say, look, is there longevity for me to invest and be in this particular pocket? They're sort of your two options. The great thing is, I mean, you can have a think about your risk appetite, what you're earning, and how hard you want to run at this. I don't think there's particularly a wrong answer. If you diversify, it's cool. One great thing about the site and what you've done at the moment is you've locked in the development site for today's price. So even if you wanted to sit on it for a few years, come back and do it, you could also do that. You may be able to, and your town plan is going to let you know how much money it's going to take you to get the permit, before you pay the contributions. So you could just have that approved, sitting ready, waiting to go for you to be able to, until you can pull out that equity, and then you can go off there. Or you can develop that side out, hold it all in one line, get it refinanced, and then be able to go out and explore it, then develop it in one line, equity release, and then go explore and develop elsewhere. You are quite young, so potentially if you want to be risk adverse, you'd go the option of diversifying the portfolio and coming back to that maybe when you've got a little bit more money, when you've got a little bit more savings, when you've got a little bit of a base or a nest egg behind you. But if you did the develop path too, I think what you're also missing is those two dwellings in the backyard that you're developing. Remember, you've got now a really low land cost because you're dividing it by 3, and then you've just got build cost and soft costs on top of that. That profit that you would make it if you sell it, you're sort of keeping it in that, and that's your equity. And then the good thing about that is that you don't have to pay GST because you haven't sold it. You don't have to pay any tax because you haven't sold it. So if you can build and hold, it's a really great strategy. Developers sort of like myself, I like to build and sell to build up that equity and to roll in. But you get into the bigger sites where it's, say, 10, 11, 12 townhouses. What you can actually do, which is cool, is, you can keep a couple of those and then roll into the next and the next and the next. So it really depends. So it really depends on a few things. Are you a developer or you're an investor? Where and what is your asset base? I mean, you only have $80,000, so you need to see how much that planning permit's going to cost. If it's going to cost you $80K once you calculate contributions, I think you need a buffer in place, man. You need a buffer in place because if there's any variations during construction, and you have to front them yourself, then you're going to find yourself in the negative or needing money. It's not a good place to be. So you really need to get solid on a strategy, potentially talking to an accountant to talk through some tax implications of selling and or holding. There is going to be equity in this deal if you develop it out, but I think first and foremost, you need to get solid on what those numbers are. If you develop it, and then you can see, okay, if I develop and hold, this is how much I have, or if I develop and sell, this is how much I make. Once you get those bottom lines, then you'll be able to determine if it's better to develop and hold, develop and sell, or invest that 80 grand elsewhere. Now, another thing I want to point out also, so this is the example, this is the particular site that Lewis said inspired him to do it. And to be honest, this is a great little pocket development. Retain the house. This had a carport over there, and that was a big backyard. So they've just bought it. They've put up a fence, they've subdivided it, and they've went boom, boom. That's actually a great little size development. So one thing I noticed here, Lewis, for your thoughts, and if we jump across, so we can see that culturally sensitive map that refers to the CHMP. And guys, I'm not an expert at Victoria market. All my deals are in New South Wales, but that identifies it. Now, with a little bit of research, this is what I found. So this is the cultural heritage management plan that he was referring to, and the 10%, and then the 10% of project costs for the contribution. That's way too high. It was like a red flag in my head. But what you can do, I already checked the online map. If we look at it here, I won't share the address, but I know it is within this area here. So yes, it is triggered. However, when I went onto the website, when is a CHMP required? Now, if a proposed development is within an area of cultural heritage sensitivity, the planning tool can help determine if it falls under the definition of a high impact activity. Good news for you, Louis, is that it says, is the proposed activity or the proposed activities exempt? Exempt activities are, number 2, the development of 3 or more dwellings on or the subdivision of an allotment of a lot or allotment that is less than 0.11 hectares in size or not within 200 meters of the coast. The good news for you is that the site that you have bought, or the property, is not 0.11 hectares in size, and it is not within 200 meters of the coast. So I actually believe that you're exempt from having to do that report. And so that is great, but I would also call council and get really granular and maybe call them about this particular site. This is the sold lot from one of those sites. I'd call them and ask them, what are the contributions for this particular project? I've got a site that's around the corner that I want to do the same thing on. What is applicable? 530 for a little 2-bed, 1-bath unit is incredible. These things would be, if I look through the photos, like they're decent. That's just like a little 2-bed granny flat. Look at that. 2-bed. That'd be 70 square meters. 70 square meters, I reckon. Measure that up. 1 car. If you can get 2 of those on your lots, man, and you're going to be building those things as well. If they're 70 square meters and you're paying $22.50 a square meter, man, you're building those for like $150,000, $180,000. Definitely. If you get a granny flat builder, you'd be able to build those things for like 200 grand each, surely. But yeah, get really granular. I just wanted to show you that as well to save you freaking out about contributions. But yeah, dial in the numbers, developer or investor, what's the strategy, get some tax and accounting and then you can run the numbers. You've got the whole picture in front of you, and you can either go down the invest elsewhere, or you can think, me personally, obviously I'm a developer, so I'd maybe look development. Would I've bought a site like this? Maybe not, but man, I think you've got 2 really strong options in front of you. You can do either or. Just keep an eye on as well your borrowing capacity, how much you have left, which is what you haven't told me. You've got $80,000 in cash left, but do you have enough borrowing to buy another $600,000 property? Because that with the 760 that you've got, if you've put down, let's just say a 10% deposit, I'd say that's 1.3 million. So that's getting quite high in terms of borrowing. You might not have the borrowing capacity left. If that is the case and you're going to be tapped out, then you might go down this route, because you can get development finance, and you can get a valuation off the land that you already loaned, the debt that you've paid on it, and then the value of the finished one. You might not even have to put in any more of your own money. You can just get a loan for the construction. So a couple of things to think about. Hopefully I've given you, some clarity. But yeah, look, if you can retain and hold this as a development strategy, hold this as a portfolio strategy, man, it can really be great for you, and then you can subdivide it down the line and sell off if you need to, if you want to develop or buy more. But yeah, these little things, cash cows, super cheap as well, single story, no scaffolding, and the guys will be able to knock them up in 4 or 5 months. So yeah, talk soon. Let me know thoughts, questions, comments down below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.